In a previous talk, I described the mosquito raid on the Gestapo headquarters at Oslo on September the 25th. Flying Officer Bristow and Pilot Officer Marshall, the crew of the third aircraft in that raid, who visited a few of the mosquito factories 4 days later, have since been through an ordeal which I feel we all ought to know about, because it just shows the tough and tenacious way these chaps go through it, and for all their casual manner. You must have heard about the mosquito crew who were injured when a bird struck their windscreen in a raid on the power station in Holland on Tuesday, October the 6th. Well, that was they, Bristow and Marshall. To wind up a day in which single mosquitoes had been continuing their daily attacks on specific targets in western Germany, a formation of mosquitoes led by Wing Commander Edwards V.C. went out at dusk to make a low-level attack that evening on the power station and factory at Hengelo, about 100 miles inland from the coast of Holland. They got it all right. The ministry reported all our aircraft returned safely. But what a show Bristow and Marshall put up that night to bring their mosquito safely home. Wing Commander Edwards was leading and Bristow was behind him and to the right. They planted their bombs from rooftop height just as it was getting dark, and they streaked away, and the roar of the leading mosquito put up a flock of curlew that were just settling down for the night in a field. Bristow couldn't avoid these curlew, and one of the birds struck the starboard engine nacelle, dented it in several inches, flattening a large diameter coolant pipe inside. Now, another bird, unfortunate bird, crashed right through the windscreen on the port side in front of the pilot's face. As this occurred at well over 300 miles an hour, it's a wonder that the pilot wasn't killed. Of course, the blow knocked him unconscious and cut his face very badly indeed, and he fell forward on the control column. Marshall grabbed the stick from him just as the aircraft was about to strike the ground and yanked it back, and the aircraft shot up into the sky. In a very steep climb, he pushed the stick forward. The crews in the other aircraft were absolutely bewildered as to what had happened to this machine, but on they went, and then imagine their situation. Just as he pushed the stick forward, Marshall did, Bristow sort of recovered consciousness and sorted himself out a bit and actually took over control again. They had to make the journey back to England with the wind roaring in through the window onto the badly cut face of the pilot. You know what the wind feels like in an open car or a train going at 50 miles an hour. Well, imagine it at 300 miles an hour, and on an October night, and onto the face of an injured and bleeding man who's only just recovered consciousness from a terrible impact like this. And imagine that he didn't know how serious his injuries were. He couldn't see at all out of one eye, and only slightly, he said, out of the other. And imagine, too, trying to stick it out for an hour or more in the possibility that somehow or other a landing could be made. Pilot Officer Marshall, who was also cut but not so severely, navigated him across the North Sea, found his home base in the dark, and then, going forward into the bomb aimer's compartment, directed him by intercom telephone as best he could in making his approach and landing. This was an extremely difficult business, only made possible by great tenacity and coolness on the part of both of them. After circling round, they were able to make their way in beside the flare path and approach and throttle back. And they were coming down nearly to the ground, but it was no good, and they reckoned they'd misjudged it, and they had to open up and go round again. They did this 3 times before being able to bring off a landing. And then the third one, as a matter of fact, was a perfect 3-pointer. The pilot was at once taken to hospital, where they had to extract the bits of windscreen and pieces of the bird's flesh from his face. And which mosquito do you think this was? It was DK296, the very one that hit the top of a house when raiding Flensburg submarine base recently, which brought back part of the chimney pot, but made a hole 4 feet long and a foot deep in the side of the fuselage. Do you remember it? The mosquitoes are tough too, you see. Anyway, Bristow was soon out and about again, and a couple of days later he and Marshall got a DFC apiece for the job they did at Oslo and for their previous raids.